Yes, it's on. Yeah. Right. Well, good afternoon once again. My name's Norman Boundbridge. My colleague Sarah and Sue are the main protagonists about this because they set it up and I only get the opportunity of delivering. So we're from Basildon Heritage Society, which is based at Wat Tyler Park, and you're always welcome to come and see us there as well. So that's a quick introduction. And okay. And just in case you might ask the question, yes, we're volunteers. Yes, we're based at Wat Tyler. Wat Tyler itself has become a hub centre. We get lots of inquiries from other archivist groups, including the council, predominantly the council, because they've got rid of their archivists. Most councils don't have an archivist anymore. So we are the recipient of a wealth of information from all the newspapers. We've got some 50 years or more of newspaper cuttings in books presented by well, now it's News Quest mainly, but people come solely to look at 50 years of newspapers. Yeah, every time we're open. Sarah and I hold Open University certificates about researching in case you're questioning our propriety. And also we was explaining we're members of two Californian county genealogical societies, namely Ventura and Santa Barbara, and we're on Zoom contacts with them every week. And they also like like to have lectures of this country across the pond, as they keep saying, the old country. So that's a background to us. Okay, Sarah. So to start, for those that haven't been before, we've had two sessions so far where we've talked about family trees, developing family trees, and some of the issues. This particular lecture or talk, it takes a real critical look at a case study. So a real live case study. And that's what we're going to do, to see how various issues, various things, nuances, name it, how you have to think in an abstract sense to find who you may be looking for, especially when there's confusion. So I'm going to say this: you're going to find skeletons in cupboards, and some results can be very upsetting. And I've had one where, I can say it because it's no names are mentioned, where one gentleman stopped me one day after starting because I just discovered that his wife had been married before he married her, and he hadn't told her, or she hadn't told him, I should say. So upsetting situations, Anyway, right. So this one is a case study. It's an actual case study, and I'm going to introduce the gentleman there. If you'll stand up and take a bow.
Willingly.
Alf Blake, and the case study is about the research we did for Alf, and he has kindly allowed us to do this and share that information with you. So don't applaud, just throw money. So what we had a look at was when Alf talked about discussing his family tree, what we had to look at was we need to sit down, simple as that. As we are here, we need to sit down, write down all the things that he knew. So this is not a critic, what's your name? Because people these days will always use abbreviations for names. So, you say, well, is that your name? And so we cleared up little things like that. year and date of birth, and I think I put the 6th of July, which I think is wrong anyway. I know that because that was one that was thrown up. I know it's something like 17th of August. Yeah. Anyway, but what we did, we proved what was said by identifying it on the records office, you know, the government's scheme. And by the way, I'm going to digress slightly on that. Did you know last week they've put the price up of certificates from £11 to £12.50, and other increased costs now associated with your accessing how you want the information. So from now, it's now going to cost you, if you want the certificate, £12.50. Every time we've talked about this, I'm sure you'll understand the parish church is a fundamental issue for our research, because the parish church records also giving you so much information, but they are the recipient of the first part of the tripartite of information being passed to a register office, wherever it's located, the location of the parish church, and the national records. So they're a key factor when you're doing research. Find, if you can, where the parish church was. That's a real key factor. So we asked Alf that, didn't we? And I don't think we got an answer at that time.
I know where it was. I can tell
Now,
you now.
yeah, now. But the point was, it's how important it is to know that. And you'll possibly see when we come to the end, the complexity of that. So we asked Alf, what was his father's name? Was there a middle name? What was his year or date of birth? Registration location at West Ham, and we will come to that later. That was the mic just falling off. The green light is still on. Yeah, so we checked these things out, and that really was the start of what we did, Alf, wasn't it? That's how we started to look at things and record them. Now, we've asked other people about recording. Do you use systems to record? Yeah? No?
This is all French to me.
Right, okay.
I can't even use a laptop properly, so if it was all in ledgers, I'd be all right.
Yeah. Sorry?
What new classes?
Right. There are obviously online systems that you can either purchase or use free. For example, you've heard of Ancestry. For example, you've heard of may have heard of Find My Past. Of course, you have to purchase those. How many of you have heard of FamilySearch.org? Sarah? Write it down, FamilySearch, one word, .org. And the reason I say that is Family Search is the parent of Ancestry. FamilySearch.org is free. However, it suffers from the same problems as Ancestry does, as Find My Past does. The input is down to yourselves, so you can input or copy mistakes. Yeah.
So you're accepting the fact that you could have a lot of mistakes.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. I can only say what I find. I don't like Ancestry. I don't like Ancestry for another reason. I'd worked in past life as a systems analyst. And ancestry, operating wise, is pretty poor. That's my view. So I tend not to use that as first choice anyway. Find My Past is newer, and it's a better operating system. That's all. It can still have mistakes in it. So everything you see, everything you go into, you've got to prove it. And that's why I keep saying, well, we'll go on to this. We've proved it. And when I've sat with Alf, that's exactly what we've done. Prove every step of the way. Okay? Right. Alf, would you like to mention about this?
Yeah, do you want me to go back to it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can, if you
Good afternoon, everyone. I was the beneficiary not only of Norman's friendship, but of his immense skill, because I had drawn a complete blank working on my own. Because of our friendship, I spoke with Norman, and he directed me through. So there's a gentleman there, Richard Blake. I never knew Richard Blake. He was the father of my father, but he died about 1940. I have a sister 10 years older than me, though, who knew Richard Blake. And I spoke with my sister and said, I'm going to try to track Richard back. Well, I could only ever find that he was married twice. And we worked through over a period of time, not very satisfactory, until I started talking to Norman. And Norman then said, well, I'll have a look with you and for you. And what did we find? A skeleton in the cupboard. Richard had been married 3 times. So there's a whole group of people, children obviously, related to us, that virtually were unknown to myself and my sisters. Certainly we knew the second wife, who sadly died as well, but the offspring from that really never featured in my upbringing or any of the interests of people that I knew until, first of all, Norman found them. I won't go on because we really got back to 1801, which I was delighted to be able to trace my lineage to there. And then I think, Norman, you somehow or other decided to do a little bit more work, and Norman's actually taken me back to 1710, to our family, which originates in 1710 from Chertsey in Surrey. And what I can now do, thanks to Norman, is I can trace their movements through Hampshire, Suffolk, and Kent to coming into London. And they were poor people, labourers, generally labourers. But one guy, Norman, found one relative who went on to be a regimental sergeant major and served. He's on there, Norman, is he? Over 30 years in the British Army, fighting in the Boer War, etc. So all those things are interesting. I have to say thanks to Norman for. Thank you, Norman.
So you can understand what we said at the very start. When you get into a real case study, there's some interesting facts. Okay, Sarah? Right. What Alf nearly mentioned was, having found the third marriage, we then started to be able to put the children together as to which applied to which family or which marriage. And that was just as interesting. So there, you may be aware that some of the complications were here, that the ancestry records don't show the mother's maiden name until the law changed in 1911. And even then, there was some, needless to say, some peculiarities that's if they want to show a name, you know, like as has been mentioned. We asked, we got together and put a question. Were you aware of this one? Charlotte Elizabeth Blake, right? So that was a child born and died early. So we starting to link the number of children, and of course, from Alf's point of view, that was increasing all of the time. So the numbers of children were going up as we delved further into it. Sorry, you okay? So the scans we did together were always looking for children now, because we've established 3 wives. Now we've got to put the children together in the right families. And that's how we found one that had in fact died, and needless to say, not shown on Ancestry, not shown on a census, because it was between census, and that's another issue, another problem. And we went on, but we started to put them together, the names of the children, and proving them. Thanks, Sarah. This is the breakdown. We got the 2, knowing that this was a short life child. We've got these. We've got the right names of the mothers. We've got this, and if I can ask Alf once again, Alf Blake, born 1911, needless to say, was your father. So we've identified now the right sequence of things. So we now got here these 6. The mother's maiden name was Skeggs, but now we uncovered another problem. Skeggs, it was her second marriage, and she brought with her to the family more children. So Alf's family became quite extended with the children that were born to the Skeggs line, Childs and Skeggs line. Okay, Sarah? Yeah, carry on.
When you say the mother's maiden name was Skeggs, was that from her previous marriage or her maiden name?
That's good question. A maiden name.
So that is her original.
Yeah, so I traced the fact that she was married to a Childs, and it was her maiden name. When it comes to the second marriage, there's maybe a couple of reasons why you can revert to the maiden name. It may be divorced, when you're legally entitled to go back to your maiden name. It may be for other reasons. It may be purely self-intent. You know, I don't like my husband. I think we'll come to it. I think his name was Childs. Yeah. Okay. Right. So this is what we did. We revisited the marriage situation. We got the dates. And we established where they lived through the census, and we took a gamble, sort of gamble, that we could identify the parish church. And we did. It was St Andrew's in Plaistow, and we were able to take off the records from the Essex Records Office of that. And we're starting now to have actual physical information, factual information. We've got this registration. Fortunately, there's another good reason about parish churches. They didn't move around that much, funnily enough. People stayed within the borough, often within the street, often within the same house. They didn't move around much, which was very helpful. This was the interesting thing, is this part here. The enumerator's ability, assuming it was an enumerator writing it all down, or possibly the church warden writing the certificate for the rector or vicar. But needless to say, they created a mistake and they ran with a mistake of the name. So later on we'd identified that, and we've got it here, I think somewhere. I know there was a mistake, but we identified it. You know, you gradually worked it out that they'd written it wrong. That came up, I think, on this lecture because of another reason. 2 marriage certificates for one person. And you think that can't happen. It does happen quite a bit. Because the church, dare I say, the rector, the vicar, didn't spot that there was a mistake on the first certificate, and I think it was 3 or 6 months later, issued another correcting certificate. But whether you know church registers, generally speaking, the old style have got 253 pages in them in 2s, numerically. So when they went to, you know, the registration office, they could be identified as the next one in the order of things. And this was a classic case of working what might be the problem out to finding a second certificate that corrected the first one of months before. So it does happen. Anyway, are you sort of happy with that? Yeah? Okay. Sarah? Oh, sorry. I think this is what Alfred indicated. Once we've got established this sequence of events, we could now work both ways. We could go backwards and come forwards, but we've actually got factual information to say, well, this is the base of our research. The family all come really from Surrey, from the locations, yeah, the locations for the registration office are either Chertsey or Weybridge, from memory. You know, so, but then there were the local identifying places, which were on Ash and other places on the certificates. Oh yeah, this might have been the one I'm talking about. Yeah. Oh yes, this was the one I was talking about. This here. So the clergy had made a mistake. But when you've got it in front of you, visibly, you see it, you know, correction. But of course, the months in between, that's the difficulty. Okay. Now we can take a much more critical look at the census associated. As you know, for those that have been before and those new, census in those times were generally done by an enumerator, or taken by an enumerator. They're as good as what the enumerator could write down. Asking was it right, was it wrong, was somewhat difficult if people couldn't read and write. So, you know, that was and is still the problem. Oh yeah, our Blake was actually written there, Blake. When you then throw that question to a system such as Ancestry, such as Find My Past, and you put Blake in, well, you're not going to find any link, are you? Because they do exactly what you would expect. They have the names written as a thought, and yeah, a problem. But we managed to identify it. We linked it all together, and we've got just that next generation that we can work with. Okay. Unfortunately, there was no 1861 census for whatever reason of the family. But I tried to prove that by looking at other families from previous census. And for whatever reason, there's no census. The reasons are often, do you know how they were handed in? Do you know if they were handed in? It's quite amazing. If you look at Essex, for example, if you look at Essex Records Office and you've got, you know exactly what you're looking for, you won't find the register because somebody has forgotten to hand the register in. And that happens quite a bit, I can assure you. The other thing, just as a side issue about that, when you start to look at Essex Records Office, more and more records are identified online without the register, the need for a register. And so you might have registers that exist from, let's say, 1945 onwards, that are still only half filled at the parish church. They're not complete, and they're not required to send them in until they are complete. Just little things that come and upset your research. They are not necessarily, all registers are not necessarily have been put in. This is what Alf was alluding to. We've found that James Blake had joined the army. When you've got large families and boys, it's no surprise to find actually another member of the family had joined the army and in the same regiment in Surrey, which we identified eventually, one of whom stayed in the army, as Alf alluded to, and we'll come to that. So these are the issues. The next issues, I want you to look at this. They moved around, okay? They moved around. Can we go to the next screen? Oh, sorry. This was the attestation form for them, but it does give you information because we've got his profession as a baker, the family address. I'm not going to ask you to read sideways, and I didn't want to turn it round, but these are the attestation forms to prove who he was. And again, we'll come to the reason for that, I think, in the next screen or so. Yeah, we'll go to the next screen. What I've indicated in that first or two screens ago, I said Eton in Berkshire, yeah? You all saw that. Suddenly it became Heaton in Oxfordshire. Only because the enumerator wrote what he thought was said. Eton was right, Heaton in Oxfordshire was wrong, Bramley in Yorkshire was meant to be Surrey. This is what you have to just contend your mind with, that you're going to find mistakes of the period. Yeah, so we researched each one and got them right. So we also started to pick up abstract professions. The nice thing out of all of that research was we got our James Blake, as Alpha said, joining the army, and he stayed as a professional soldier. And he is, oh yeah, I was going to come down to the end first. He is entitled to be called, if he wished to use the Royal Hospital of Chelsea, he is a Chelsea pensioner if he wished to use it. So he's got a formal acceptance of his army profession, army career. His brother had left early. He stayed a couple of years for whatever reason, but James carried on that being his profession. And we found that out. And he was a training officer, as indicated, and he retired in 1892, which we established. And I never found any record of him at Chelsea, so he was obviously quite a well man. He didn't need to go in for the hospital, nor did he need to go in there as as a resident. So he's got a lot of accreditation with him. Okay, Sarah. So just dropping back. Now we've got unsubstantiated facts. John and Elizabeth Blake had 13 children. So we needed to start to identify. But he was never recorded. So in those days, somewhat lax about registering a birth. So we've got no identification. Quite normal of the time. Some did, some didn't. We found a baptism though, and that was good. We couldn't find this family again on the 1861 census, and again we did find him linked to his brother at Aldershot. It's no surprise because that was a secondary line of the work in the area. We found a possible death, so it's further research to be done there. So longevity, fairly longevity for the time period, 40, 60 years or so. But I haven't pursued it, but by the time I wrote this presentation out. Alfred. We've identified most of this, all of the facts of birth, death. This is where it starts also now to get the social histories, because they were working on farms. And he was identified with the family on a farm, Crondall in Hampshire. So they moved around in that sense, in the agricultural industry. And he was, this is a nice one now, when you can find the burial records from the church, because it identifies so much, and we did. So he was buried at All Saints Church in Crondall in Hampshire, and with a date as well. So good information that came out of that. Okay, as said, and it has here, no registration details. They never, offhand, there's another little issue. I don't know whether where Crondall's registration was, where the main location was. I don't know. Not off the top of my head. Yeah. So I can't remember how far they travelled. I really can't. Again, the point about that was the family have generally got a base in the Chertsey Weybridge area. So often, I don't know about yourselves, but you might have known where your parents might have been registered, what church they might have used. So it could have been the same thing here, that they've gone back to their originating church. So we identify what we've got to do. That's the point. This question came up. We started to get into it. What were the names of the known siblings now? We're starting to widen out. The brothers and sisters. And Alf, would you like to mention your sisters?
Yes.
There's a good reason, because you were there.
Well, I was there, or they were there before me. The eldest one, as you can see there, Maureen Ellen, middle name after my mother, born 1934. She was 90 last week, and she was dancing at the party, so she's obviously inherited of her father's abilities. The second sister, she now lives in Norfolk. She's been in Norfolk since the early 60s when she got married, and I find it very difficult to even understand her now because she speaks with a Norfolk accent, and but she's reasonably well. And as you can see by the dates there, 34 and 38, and then any more. Well, just a quick aside, my father decided he didn't want to go in the trenches at the outbreak of war, so he joined the Royal Navy and ended up as a stoker, which is right at the bottom of the ship and where most casualties are when they get attacked. But not for that. He didn't serve anywhere until, well, he did serve. He was in Egypt, in the Little Bitter Lake for nearly 3 years, and he eventually got 4 weeks leave back in the UK. And guess what? He left my mother with me. Thanks, Norm.
So we're picking up in the general context. We're picking up what questions you could sit and discuss with any person. I use the term client, but any person that you might be doing or asked to do some work for. And it's the sort of chronology that you want to think about, and I'm sure you all probably know that anyway. So that was good. We got back to that. Okay, Sarah? We found the skeletons in cupboards. We found issues that you will always come across, and that is people born and died within the range of a census. Difficult. We've gone through all of this. I think we generally discussed this. I'm going to probably put Alf on the spot with this to come back and just answer the question of the people that you actually know. You mentioned all of the brothers and sisters.
Yeah, very much.
Sorry.
Okay. I grew up with knowing all of the 6 people here. They were aunts and uncles. I go back to the child's Skeggs marriage, and the 2 aunts in that, Kate and Florence, I knew very well, but I didn't know the other 2, the 2 male children. I couldn't trace those at all. Where also, excuse me, excuse me, in my father's direct siblings, there was all obviously animosity in there. So some of those I never knew either. The majority of them I did, but 1 or 2, and certainly those that were his half brothers and sisters, I knew very little of those at all. I spoke with my elder sister last week, and asked her. She knew them better than I did because they were all still living in London at that time. But because I was born in Dagenham and brought up in Dagenham, I'd moved away from that circle of people.
Point being, they were still there. You didn't know your sister did.
My sister did, yeah, and I'd never spoken to her.
Yeah. But they still need equation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's very difficult when you're doing a north, or dare I say, north-south lineage, when you know that you've got to go east-west as well. You know, you've got to broaden out to pick the story of the family up, and these are the sort of things that are going to occur. You know, do you know them all? Do you, absolutely, absolutely. You know, and that's what we. Yeah, but it's absolutely spot on. Because you might want to leave as a legacy this story, and you want it to be right. You don't need other people saying, well, he forgot about that, or you didn't know about those. So as much as you can, you want to have the story, and that's fine. That's understandable. Sarah? Right. On the feedback, when we asked Alf originally, he knew nothing about the marriages. Yeah, first marriage. So as long as he was happy for that to be identified, you can proceed. What happened to the Skeggs child's marriage? And it was absorbed, as Alf has just said, from the family. They were aware, even if Alf wasn't. When we reviewed it, the area where the family originate from and the military location is no surprise. Weybridge, Chertsey are all the centre of the army, you know, in Surrey and Hampshire. What it did identify, as has been said, was with that sort of number of children, or even siblings and children, it was probable that they were agricultural workers, because that was the lie of the land in the area, farmland and the professions. And finally here, James Blake, 1801, the paternal grandfather, Richard, who was Alf's grandfather, was born in Shalford in Surrey and married, etc. So we've got other details, and that's who he is, the great-great-grandfather. Okay.
There's one interesting thing, if I may, Norman. When I was trying to do this on my own, Richard, my grandfather, the birth certificate reads that he was born in the workhouse in Aldershot. And I immediately thought that the family were destitute, and probably one of the reasons were that they were going into the army. In actual fact, Norman's research showed that the only maternity facilities for women was in the workhouse. So if you see that, it's not necessarily that your family are in the workhouse. It was the only place a woman could go and safely give birth.
Yep, correct. And that, if you're ever doing London research, I forget the name of it, but it's the Fondling Hospital in Whitechapel. Yeah, I think I've got that right. But it's exactly that. All of the East End Londoners went to the Fondling Hospital for births, because it was the only hospital equipped to cater for them, if needed. So, right, I said at the start, the difficulties that you might face when you've got known areas, but only one registration location. So you know the actual locations, and in theory, all of these could issue certificates. So finding out the parish church in the context of these is most important. And as you can see, the number, sorry, can you see? As you can see, the number of these, just 2 of the parishes at West Ham have got that many places that you've got to look. There's actually some good records there and good history, but you've got to look for it, and it is time consuming. I think West Ham Union Workhouse was in, I think, Canhall Road, I think. I know there was one there. I'm trying to figure out. Oh yeah, I got thrown out of that one myself. I went for a choir audition. I actually went for a choir audition at St John's. No, not required, thank you. And that's just digressing slightly. I've also been thrown out of a cathedral, Noyon, in France. And the reason was the priest was going home to lunch. So he said, I'm in French, you know, I'm afraid I can't accommodate you for an hour and a half. Will you come back? Oh, no. So I managed to be thrown out of a cathedral and a high church so far. Anyway, but these are the sort of problems you can face. Identifying a parish church. What is also very mindful in one sense is parish areas. Let's take Basildon. Off the top of my head, I'm not going to give you a number because I don't know it off the top of my head. But union workhouses cater for so many of the parishes in Basildon, for example. Although Basildon wasn't one of them, because it per se didn't exist. But it is another issue. If you can find the fact of saying West Ham, you've got as many workhouses to identify for research. Thank you.
Well done, Norman.
Right. Don't applaud, just throw money.